Just as the world struggled to process the shocking assassination of Charlie Kirk, a new message appeared online, not from investigators or political allies, but from his wife, Erica. Her words were simple, raw, and deeply moving. Amidst her grief, she chose to share a post already hailed as one of the most heartfelt statements ever issued in the wake of tragedy. It was not political. It was not strategic. It was a pure expression of love, loss, and faith, a moment of silence after the storm. In the days following Charlie Kirk's death, a heavy silence settled over Utah Valley University and across the nation. Crowds dispersed, investigators combed rooftops, and politicians delivered statements of outrage. But from the Kirk family, there was only quiet. Erica, known for her work in faith-based media and social initiatives, refrained from speaking immediately. She withdrew from the public eye, focusing entirely on her two young children and the private agony of losing her husband so suddenly and violently. That silence itself became powerful. Supporters flooded social media with prayers and condolences, waiting for a word from the woman who had stood beside Charlie for years. News outlets speculated, when would she break her silence? Would she address politics? Call for justice? Or retreat entirely into private mourning? Then, days later, the announcement appeared. It was not a press conference. It was not a polished statement read from behind a podium. It was a heartfelt post, shared on her personal page, written in her own words. Accompanying the text was a photograph of Charlie with their children, a tribute to the man she loved, a father to their children, and a poignant reminder that grief is as human as it is devastating. She wrote not of anger or vengeance, but of memory and faith. She spoke of how Charlie kissed their children goodbye before every trip, how deeply he believed in his mission, and how he never imagined his voice would be silenced in this way. She anchored her message in the same foundation she had always shared, Scripture. She called God their refuge and strength, even in the darkest storm. Erica's announcement. When Erica Kirk finally spoke publicly, the tone of her message made it clear this was not a political statement. It was an act of love and remembrance. Her post began by acknowledging the unbearable shock of the past week, the suddenness with which her family's life had been turned upside down, and the painful reality that her children would grow up without the father who had been their hero. She described Charlie not as the controversial public figure known to millions through television and social media, but as a husband who made time for late-night talks and as a father who told bedtime stories even when exhausted from travel. She wrote about the small, everyday rituals that made their family life rich: morning walks with the kids, Sunday services where they sat side by side, and how Charlie always found ways to remind them that faith was stronger than fear. These intimate details struck a chord with readers, stripping away the public persona to reveal the private man beneath, a man who, despite being a central figure in American politics, still carried groceries, laughed at inside jokes, and called home from every trip. Erica's announcement was also woven with the thread of faith that has defined her life. She shared that in her darkest moments, she clung to the same scripture she had posted before the shooting: God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. To her, those words were no coincidence but a divine reminder that hope endures even when everything else falls apart. She closed her message with a vow: she would raise their children according to the values Charlie cherished: faith, conviction, and courage, and that his voice, though silenced, would echo through the next generation. She asked for prayers not only for her family but also for a nation she said was in desperate need of healing. The reaction to her words. Within minutes of Erica Kirk's announcement going live, the post began to ripple outward. Screenshots circulated across social platforms. News outlets picked up the message, and hashtags in her name trended worldwide. What struck many observers was not the political context, but the raw humanity. At a time when debates over security, ideology, and responsibility dominated headlines, her words shifted the focus back to love, faith, and loss. Supporters flooded the comments with condolences and prayers. Thousands of messages poured in from students, Turning Point USA members, and families who said they felt personally touched by Charlie's work. For them, Erica's words were a reminder that behind every public figure stands a family that bears the weight of tragedy. Conservative leaders reposted the announcement, calling it a testament to strength in the face of unimaginable grief. But the impact of her statement reached far beyond her husband's supporters. People across the political spectrum, including critics of Kirk's views, paused to acknowledge the sincerity of her grief. Many admitted that while they disagreed with his politics, Erica's post made them see him differently, not as a symbol of division, but as a husband and father taken too soon. Even prominent voices who had sparred with Kirk in the media expressed sympathy, sharing Erica's message as a call for compassion over conflict. National networks reinforced the significance of her words. Anchors read portions of her post on air, framing it as one of the most moving responses to a political assassination in recent memory. Commentators noted how Erica's faith-centered approach set her apart from the combative tone of the surrounding political discourse. Social media platforms lit up with personal reflections. Users posted stories of their own losses, connecting Erica's words to the universality of grief. For a brief moment, the online conversation softened, shifting from outrage to empathy. A glimpse into their private life. One reason Erica Kirk's announcement resonated so deeply was the glimpse it offered into a side of Charlie Kirk the public rarely saw. For years, he had been defined by his fiery speeches, his debates, and his role as one of America's most recognizable conservative figures. But through Erica's words, she peeled back the curtain, revealing the private man behind the public persona. She spoke of the routines that grounded their family, how Charlie never missed breakfast with their children when he was home, how he phoned in from the road to say good night, how he made time to read scripture aloud at the dinner table. These details stood in stark contrast to the combative figure often seen on television. They painted a picture of a man who, beyond the stage lights and microphones, embraced ordinary joys and responsibilities with the same intensity he brought to politics. Her reflections offered small, intimate images that lingered with readers. How he carried their youngest child on his shoulders during long walks, how he teased her about always packing too much for family trips, and how his laughter could fill a room. For those who had only known him through headlines, these moments humanized him in a way that speeches and interviews could never have. By sharing these pieces of their life, Erica did more than honor her husband. She reminded the nation that political figures are also parents, spouses, and friends. Her words stripped away the armor of ideology and left behind something far more relatable, a family's love, interrupted by tragedy. Faith as the centerpiece of her message. At the heart of Erica Kirk's announcement was something that has defined her life as much as her husband's public work, faith. From the moment she shared scripture before the tragedy to the heartfelt post she made after his death, Erica made it clear that her strength came not from politics or public support, but from her relationship with God. Her words leaned heavily on the same verse she had posted hours before the shooting: "God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble." Many were struck by the timing of that original message, seeing it as almost prophetic in light of what followed. In her announcement, Erica returned to that verse, not as a coincidence, but as a foundation. She wrote that in her darkest hour, she clung to the truth that God was still present, even when everything else had been ripped away. By centering her message in faith, Erica reframed the tragedy. Instead of being consumed by anger or despair, she transformed her grief into a powerful testimony. She reminded readers that their family story was not only one of loss but also of resilience rooted in belief. Her words echoed with the conviction that even in death, Charlie's legacy was not silenced, because it lived on in their children and their shared faith. For many who read the announcement, this was the most potent element. In an era when politics often dominate every conversation, her decision to ground her message in Scripture offered something more profound: a call to remember that hope and healing can exist even in the midst of devastation. Supporters described her post not only as a tribute but as a sermon of strength. The political world's response. Erica Kirk's announcement did not remain confined to the personal corners of social media. Within hours, it was quoted on news broadcasts, referenced in editorials, and reposted by political leaders across the spectrum. The tone of her words, soft, grieving, yet unwavering in faith, stood in sharp contrast to the charged rhetoric that had dominated the days immediately after Charlie's assassination. Conservative allies framed her statement as a testament to strength under unimaginable circumstances. Prominent figures within the movement reposted excerpts, often highlighting her resolve. To them, Erica's post symbolized not only resilience but also continuity, a sign that the Kirk family would carry forward the mission he had left behind. What surprised many was the response from outside those circles. Politicians who had often clashed with Charlie publicly paused to acknowledge the humanity of Erica's words. Some admitted that while they disagreed with his politics, her grief was universal and her message of faith deserved respect. In a polarized climate, her post created a rare moment of empathy, bridging divides that usually seemed unbridgeable. Media coverage amplified the announcement's reach. Headlines described it as heartbreaking yet hopeful, and news anchors read passages aloud on air. Editorials noted how her refusal to use the moment for a political attack elevated the conversation, reminding the country that behind every public figure lies a family caught in the crossfire of tragedy. The impact also rippled through grassroots supporters. Local prayer gatherings and vigils began, citing Erica's words, holding them up as a guide for how to grieve with dignity. At candlelight memorials, the verse she quoted, "God is our refuge and strength," was recited collectively, turning her private faith into a public expression of resilience. How the public interpreted her words. For the public, Erica Kirk's announcement carried a weight that went beyond the words themselves. In the days after her message was posted, discussions erupted, not only about what she said, but about what it meant for her family and for the larger national moment. Many readers focused on the intimacy of her tribute. They saw her words as a reminder that at the core of political headlines and debates, there are human lives and fragile relationships. Social media was filled with reflections from people who had lost loved ones suddenly, who said her description of small rituals and private joys resonated with their own experiences of grief. For them, her announcement was less about politics and more about solidarity in mourning. faith communities amplified her words as a testimony of strength. Churches across the country shared her post, framing it as an example of unwavering belief in times of crisis. Pastors referenced it in sermons, emphasizing how Scripture could provide comfort when logic and reason fell short. To many believers, Erica's announcement was not only a statement of loss but also a witness of faith. Others interpreted her words through the lens of legacy. Supporters of Charlie Kirk argued that Erica's vow to raise their children with the values he cherished meant that his influence would continue long after his death. For them, the announcement was a reassurance that the movement he built would not fade, even in his absence. Some read her message as a cultural moment. Commentators noted how rare it was for a spouse's words to cut through the noise of media and politics, creating a pause in the usual cycle of outrage. For a brief period, her announcement shifted the national mood from conflict to reflection. The media coverage and headlines. Once Erica Kirk's announcement was shared, it quickly moved from a personal post to a national headline. Major networks interrupted programming to highlight her words, not because of their political implications, but because of their emotional resonance. Anchors read her message aloud on air, often pausing as the weight of her grief came through. In an era when political commentary dominates coverage, her words stood apart. They were not designed to score points but to speak from the heart. Print and digital outlets followed with in-depth features. Headlines varied, but all captured the same theme: heartfelt tribute from Erica Kirk, faith and family in the face of tragedy, and Charlie Kirk's wife breaks silence. Some framed the announcement as a moment of grace amid turmoil, while others emphasized the quiet strength of a woman choosing faith over anger. Commentary pieces dissected the cultural meaning of her words. Editorial boards noted how rare it was for a statement to transcend political lines, arguing that Erica's announcement offered a reset, a reminder that even in divisive times, grief could unite rather than divide. Lifestyle and faith-focused media highlighted her reliance on Scripture, portraying her as a model of spiritual resilience. The coverage extended globally as well. International outlets, which had already been reporting on the assassination, translated her announcement into multiple languages. Readers in Europe, Asia, and Latin America encountered Erica's message as a testament to love and loss that needed no political context to be understood. Not all coverage was purely reverential. Some media critics noted how quickly the story of her words became part of the broader narrative around Charlie Kirk's life and death. Yet, even skeptics admitted the sincerity of her tone was undeniable, and that her post carried a level of authenticity often absent in political discourse. The long-term significance of her announcement. Erica Kirk's announcement may have been brief, but its impact could shape how Charlie Kirk's legacy is remembered. In a moment when narratives often fracture along partisan lines, her message recentered the story on family, love, and faith. This shift ensured that his memory would not be solely tied to politics but also to the personal life he built away from the spotlight. Her vow to raise their children in the values Charlie cherished carried symbolic weight. It was not a policy statement, but it functioned as a declaration that his work and influence would continue through her family. For many supporters, it was reassurance that the principles Kirk fought for would not end with his death. At the same time, the announcement highlighted Erica herself as a figure to watch. She had remained mainly in the background during her husband's public career, but her words now positioned her as a voice of faith and resilience in the national conversation. Whether she chooses to step into a larger public role or maintain her privacy, her message has already etched itself into the narrative of this tragedy. In the long term, Erica's announcement may serve as a touchstone, a reminder that beyond debate and ideology, the human dimension of loss defines legacies more than any speech or headline. A legacy beyond politics. Charlie Kirk's assassination left behind grief, questions, and a nation divided over what his life represented. Yet Erica's announcement offered a counterpoint to the noise, a reminder that his story was not defined only by political battles but by the quiet, unseen life he built at home. Her words transformed a headline into a legacy, ensuring that when history remembers him, it will also not forget the man who prayed with his children, the husband who supported his wife, and the believer who anchored his life in faith. The power of her message was its simplicity. She did not lecture or demand. She chose to share love, loss, and scripture. In doing so, Erica redirected public attention away from violence and toward the values that shaped their family. For many, it was the first time Charlie Kirk was humanized beyond the rallies and speeches, a reminder that behind every public figure stands a family that carries the burden of both their successes and their tragedies. Her post also raised the possibility of a new chapter. Whether Erica steps into a more public role or remains focused on her children, her words have already positioned her as a voice of resilience. Supporters now look to her as a guardian of Charlie's legacy, while faith communities see her as an example of grace under suffering. Ultimately, Erica's announcement marked the transition from event to memory, from tragedy to legacy. It underscored that even in a fractured political climate, love and faith can unite where ideology divides. Charlie Kirk's voice may have been silenced, but through Erica's words, his influence echoes on, not only in the causes he championed, but in the lives he touched most deeply.